All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Illinois Green Party series. I'm your host, David Rich. We have three guests on tonight, all uniform. They were the three authors of the book Bright Green Lies. And we had Max and Derek on once before. Now we have the pleasure of having Lier on as well, who is the third author, right? Third contributor of Bright Green Lies. So welcome, everybody, but especially Lier, since you're the newcomer. Good to have you guys back on. This is going to be really exciting. I mean, when I first read the book, I was like, being in the Green Party, you get disappointed every day. But but I thought we had some sort of semblance of something going on. And then, I know you said, Derek, last time that you have hope, and I hope you do, and we're going to get to that later. But I read your book. I'm like, unbelievable. Just when you think things are, on the upswing. Imagine that government's lying to us. Anyway, so welcome to the show. Let's start off with whoever wants to take the reins first. Just kind of give us a real quick summary of like the book, what it's about, and how you guys got into it. How you all got into it. I'm sorry.
Well, we see three problems mainly with the environmental movement as it stands right now. And the first is that this used to be a movement, the goal of which was to protect the places and the creatures that we loved.
Right.
And that changed. It has now become, how do we continue to fuel their destruction? So if we're not going to use fossil fuel, we got to find another source to fuel that continued disruption. That's all that this is now. And we used to be the people that were against industrial civilization, because that's literally what it is taking living communities, turning them into dead commodities, and then turning those into private wealth. Right. We were the people that were going to throw our bodies between what was left of this planet and the machine. And instead, we've just thrown all in with the machine now. So we just need another fuel source. That's what it's become. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is that it can't be done. There is none of these quote alternative energies will ever scale up to actually power what's required for industrial civilization. So this is why Ozzie Zenner calls it fossil fuel and alternative fossil fuel, because they're still based on the exact same industrial platform. You can't have lithium mining without diesel fuel. And oil and gas are functionally irreplaceable in this economy. It's not possible because of their energy density. Nothing that comes from the wind or the sun or any of that is ever going to scale up to match that energy density. It just is not possible. It's had millions of years under the surface of the earth to become that dense. Sunlight's never going to be that dense. Right. So I mean, those are the main problems that we are trying to address. Oh, and also that all of these technologies that we're supposed to be rooting for now and advocating for are themselves just assaults against the living planet. They're horrifying when you look into them. There's not a one of them that's gentle, kind, good, that repairs the earth in any way. So that's why we wrote the book.
So from the perspective, what I always come back to is, does this help blue whales? If blue whales were given a vote, what would they vote for? Or if Delta Smelt were given a vote, or if the prairies of Illinois were given a vote, what would they vote for? Or what would they advocate for? And I mean, there's a really good example. The last tallgrass prairie in Texas is, as we speak, being threatened by a industrial solar facility. And is that what prairie dogs would want? Is that what ferrets would want? Is that what coyotes would want? Is that what wolves would want? Buffalo? The tallgrass prairies themselves, whose names I don't know. No. And so that for me is always the question that I come back to is, what would nature want? What would the wild beings who live there want? They don't want it. They don't want their homes destroyed to be turned into more industrial energy or industrial power.
There's actually a really interesting comparison there between what we're talking about and the whole platform of the Green Party, the whole Green Party's existence in this country, which is, the Green Party's existence is based on this idea that if you're choosing between two evil corporate parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, two warmongering parties, two parties that prioritize the wealthy over working people, two parties that prioritize economic growth over everything else, that, there really isn't a lesser of two evils in so many situations between those two parties, because they're almost identical. They may have some differences on social policies that are sometimes very important, but they're very, very similar. And so there's this sort of interesting comparison there between that argument that, Green Party people make, and this argument that we're making about this, so-called renewable energy technologies, electric vehicles, and so on, so many people argue that these are, a harm reduction technique. They're the lesser of two evils. People will use that type of phraseology all the time. And that, I'm just reiterating what Lear and Derek just said. But, our whole point is that this really isn't the lesser of two evils. Both fossil fuels and these so-called alternative energy technologies are extremely destructive to the earth. Like Lear said, they're both fully dependent on fossil fuels, so there's not really a functional difference between the two in terms of actually replacing fossil fuels, and they don't really represent an alternative to the status quo as it has been, the earth-destroying status quo. So just like, Green Party advocates, I think people are saying, about the political system, we're saying a similar thing about the energy system. We're saying we can't just have this superficial change back and forth between these two parties. We can't just have this superficial change back and forth between fossil fuels and renewable energy. They're both a big problem. And we need much more fundamental change in our political system, our economic system, and our way of life.
Yeah, well said. No, that's a good point. I mean, you're right. I mean, the Green Party and I would say the Libertarian Party as well, the two biggest third parties, exist not merely to compete with the duopoly that's in place. It's to get rid of it because it's just not working. Like you summed it up very well, Max. And it's devastating. It's destroying everything. Those two parties are just, and the lesser of two evils. You're right. I hear that a lot. But the lesser of two evils is still evil. Why not actually vote for or champion something good? Actually sufficiently good for add value to the world instead of decreasing it. Which is what the pursuit of goodness is you're adding value, making nature healthier. By not destroying it like we are. So let's talk, because we left off last time on, I realized at the end of the show that we had not discussed something in the book that I think is very important and extremely interesting and needs to be pointed out, is the difference between power and energy. So whoever wants to take the reins on that, please, let's start us off on that thinking.
I'll be glad to start it up. Okay. And it's actually quite topical again, always, but right now, because I've been hearing that I've been seeing a lot of people comment that because, and I haven't heard lefties say this, but this has been more right-wing people saying that because Germany decided to get rid of their nuclear power plants, therefore that has made them more susceptible to the necessity of importing oil and gas from Russia. And I've seen this argument made quite a bit, but it's a completely ridiculous argument. And then we're going to come back to the bright greens in a second. It's a ridiculous argument because nuclear energy only generates electricity. It doesn't run cars. It doesn't, and so that's the current use. And then the use that the bright greens have made of it have been that lots of, Bill McKibben, Naomi Klein, a lot of them have been talking about this German miracle where, 80% of German energy is provided by provided by renewables. Or you'll see, I think there's 50 or 70 or 80 cities in the United States, and lots of universities have said that they've joined this Sierra Club pledge to go to 100% renewable energy. And this includes Los Angeles. There's a lot of major cities. And the thing is, it's completely bunk because all of these renewables, even if we ignore how horrible a lot of the renewables are, like the majority being biomass, which is just cutting down trees and burning them, or growing crops and turning them into ethanol, even if we ignore all that, electricity only accounts for 20% of total energy use. So when they'll say Los Angeles is on the verge of 100% renewable energy, what they're really meaning is that they're on the verge of 20% so-called renewable. And they do this all the time, and they'll say this is pretty close to a direct quote, that this shows that Germany is able to, I think it was in the New York Times even, that Germany is able to run a modern industrial economy on renewables because it had, for 1 hour on a Sunday, very windy, sunny Sunday, it had 100% of its electricity, but they always say energy, from so-called renewables. But again, that's only 20%. And you could argue, well, that's better than nothing. But part of my point is that they're lying. And I'm doing a terrible job of this. So either Max or Leah should should clean up after my mess.
It's coherent. I get what you're saying, but okay, if you want to pass it off.
Yeah, I'm going to pass it off to somebody who can say it better.
Well, the thing to remember is the 80-20, that 20% of the total energy that humans are using in these places is going to, only 20% of it is electricity. The rest, the other 80% is always fossil fuels.
Costa Rica.
So I'm actually going to get into Costa Rica. No, it's fine. It's the example that gets thrown at us all the time. Oh, Costa Rica, it's so wonderful. Look, they have all these hydroelectric dams, and so they don't use, I don't know, there's 100% is from it's not. It's the electricity. The other 80%, they didn't take cars off the roads.
Right.
They still have trucks. And the reason is because diesel fuel versus the best batteries that technology has been able to create. So for diesel fuel versus batteries, so the energy density of diesel fuel is 46. That's like kilojoules per whatever. It doesn't even matter. Just remember
kilojoules per kilogram.
All right, kilojoules per kilogram. So that's how much it weighs, how much energy you're going to get out of it. And the number is 46. So the very best batteries we've come up with are anywhere between 1 and 0.17. So at the very best, 46 times more energy dense is what diesel gets you. 46 times.
Yeah.
Now, apply that to a car or a truck. Apply that. So if you have a 60,000 payload on a truck, 55,000 pounds of that is just the batteries. You see, this is not possible. Is it just, that's the end of trucking. Now, I don't have a problem with the end of trucking. I'm just saying there's no way that in Costa Rica, they don't have cars and trucks. They can't.
Right.
Even if they're generating all the electricity to pay for all the cars, like I think that's the claim, that someday we will do this. How are you going to do it? Everything on that car, on that truck is going to be a battery. There's no point in doing it at that point.
Right, true.
So they're lying. They're lying about this because they just are using the 20% that is electricity. And now we can go through and talk about all the ways they propose that we generate this electricity. And every last one of them is at least as bad as fossil fuel. So again, Costa Rica, they make these claims about the hydroelectric dams. Well, one thing, dams destroy rivers. Let's just get that out of the way. If you care about the life of rivers, they kill them. Okay. And it's abominable to me that anybody who calls himself an environmentalist wants to suggest that we use dams. But dams are the single largest source of anthropogenic methane ever. That's it. 23% of the methane that humans are producing comes from dams. There is no longer
dams.
large.
How is that? How does that work?
It's because in a river, things move, they flow. And when you have a dam, what you have is this giant reservoir. And so all the plant matter is now sunk to the bottom, and it has to degrade anaerobically, and that means methane. That's how that stuff always degrades. That's what happens inside ruminants. It's what happens on the surface of a prairie very, very slowly. Yeah, it happens inside humans. That's the bacteria that can actually degrade cellulose. None of the other creatures on this planet can do that. Those are the only creatures that are prepared to digest cellulose, and they always create methane. The problem is there's always been a methane cycle, and that's fine. The planet knows how to handle this, but we're adding this enormous load because these should be free-flowing rivers and that nature should just take care of it. And instead, we're creating this layer of sort of methanogenic, bubbling underneath there. So again, it's 23% of all the methane that humans have released is in the form of dams. Wow. So even if you don't care about rivers, I don't know how you can't, but let's pretend you don't care about the fish, and you don't care about the birds, and you don't care about the bears, and you don't care about the wolves, you don't care about the trees, you don't care about any of it. All you care about is global warming. This is a very stupid idea.
Yeah. No, that's why I love this book, is because of things like that. I mean, who knows that? Who knows that? Excuse me. Dams contribute 23% of the methane from human behavior. That nobody knows that. That's well, you three know that. Obviously, that's why this book is so important. So thanks for pointing that out, Leah, for sure. That's Max. What do you think? What do you got?
Well, it's not just. it's not just us, it's not just you who didn't know that until recently. This science is actually relatively new. If you look at the research, the scientific papers that have been put out there about, methane emissions from reservoirs, scientists have known for a little while that these reservoirs in tropical areas tend to put out a decent amount of methane. Some people have called them methane bombs, actually going back a decade or more. But what the pretty new research is that dams in more temperate, more cold regions of the world actually pump out a ton of methane as well. And so, this is the problem with bodies like the IPCC and all of these climate change, quote unquote, solutions that are being promoted around the world, is that often they're based on data that's wrong, right? So we have seen bodies like the IPCC in the past promote hydroelectricity as a major solution, quote unquote, to global warming. And there are hundreds of new large dams being built around the world, including massive ones in China and in the Congo. And, the same could be said of like biomass, for example, and biofuels. These have been encoded into the structure of law in places like the European Union as, quote unquote, green energy, when the actual latest and most up-to-date scientific information says not only do these emit a lot of greenhouse gases, these biofuels, these biomass power plants, but they actually release more than coal. So in many cases, you have governments in places like Germany shutting down coal-fired power plants and replacing them with biomass power plants. And they're actually releasing more carbon than they were before. So there's no climate benefit. And on top of that, you have these massive forests in places like the southeastern United States being cut down, ground up into pellets, dried in kilns, and shipped across the ocean to be burned in these power plants. And they call that carbon neutral.
Right.
Right. This is just sort of a few examples of the fraudulent accounting. We write in the book that the fraudulent accounting you see in the global warming arena, in the carbon emission counting arena, really would make Enron jealous. It's incredibly corrupt and baseless, and it's a massive problem.
Wow.
Yeah, I really want to drive home what we're losing to this biomass. So the southern wetland forest, which is where a lot of the biomass in Europe is coming from, is trees in the United States. But that has been an ancient refugium since the Pleistocene, and its biological diversity is unmatched. It's considered a biological hotspot because there are so many endemic species there that just exist nowhere else. And so this includes creatures like the southeastern American kestrel, the red cockaded woodpecker, the gopher tortoise. There are 400 other species that depend on the burrows of those tortoises alone. It's being logged 4 times faster than the Amazon rainforest, and nobody hears about it. We are the people who are supposed to be against this. And instead, it's our movement that's saying, oh, bring it on. This is somehow wonderful electricity. We can continue to have our ice cream 24/7 and this lovely industrial lifestyle if we just look the other way and keep pelleting the forest. We used to call it deforestation. That's what's happening across the southeastern United States. And these are the creatures that are dying for this.
That's crazy. Derek, did you want to say something? I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna riff a little bit on what Max said about it being called carbon neutral. That the argument for biomass being carbon neutral is that the trees sequestered the carbon anyway, so we're just burning it now, so that's carbon neutral. Or another argument they make is that they will, one hopes, grow again over 100 years, and so it's carbon neutral because the carbon's released now and it'll be sequestered over the next 100 years. But that's the equivalent of, if we take the first one where the trees sequestered it and now we're just going to release it, so that's carbon neutral, is the equivalent of you put some money in the bank and then I take it all out. And, well, that's carbon neutral. Money was put in, money was taken out. Who cares? And,
Right.
Or another way to look at this is the other way I said, where, and they make both of these arguments, where the carbon will eventually, the carbon will eventually be re-sequestered by the trees. Can you imagine any company that said our books are balanced because we're spending the money right now, but we estimate that we will make it back in the next 100 years. So currently we are we are not operating in the red. I mean,
Right.
they would go to prison, the accountants. But
For fraud.
yeah,
Yeah, no, that would be for some pretty bad accounting there for sure. Real quick back on the power versus energy thing. So the power is the creation of electricity. That's what's needed to create electricity.
okay.
And or is that, am I getting those backwards? Power, which one's for the fuel and which one's
Okay.
for the electricity?
So it takes a certain amount of energy for you to go to the store. And it doesn't matter whether somebody picks you up and carries you, in which case they are expending the energy, or if you carry yourself, then in which case you're expending the energy. Or if you get on the back of an elephant, then the elephant is expending the energy. It takes a certain amount of energy to move you from one place to another.
Yes.
Power is how quickly the energy is expended. So if you run really fast to the grocery store, then that will mean you use the same amount of energy as if you walked really slow, but it took more power because power is the rate at which energy is expended. And one example that helped me understand this was, all other things being equal, that is just a thought experiment. You could have a diesel truck, a huge semi, or a lawnmower. Both could pull a load across the country, excluding gravity and everything else. And it would take the same amount of energy to move it. It's just it would take 500 years to get there with a lawnmower because it puts out not very much power. And the way this relates to electricity is that the grid is set up with alternating current, and alternating current can't be stored, which means the important thing is how much power can the grid deliver at any time, because if you want to run an industrial economy, you need the energy to be provided reliably, which means you need to be able to produce or to generate the power that you will need at any moment to run everything from your X-ray equipment to your ventilators to your retractable stadium roofs at the sports arena. And so the point is that all of this energy, all of this electricity that is generated by solar, wind, etc., it can't be stored as such. It's just use on demand. That's how the whole grid works, which is really easy for then. And none of us are advocates for coal or kerosene or diesel or anything else, but that's what makes oil so easy to run a generating system. Is you just have all the oil stacked in barrels, and then you can burn it as you need it, as opposed to solar only works when the sun's shining, and wind only happens when so what they have to do is they have to store it in some ways. And something that I didn't know till we wrote the book and that blew me away is, we hear a lot about lithium batteries, we hear about all these different batteries, but 99% of the grid scale storage is just in big dams. It's what's it called, Max?
Pumped hydro.
Pumped hydro, where you have two reservoirs, and whenever you have extra energy that's not being sucked on the grid, you pump water up, and then when you have greater demand, you flow it back down. So basically, it's just two big dams with all the attendant environmental damage. 99% of grid scale storage is dams. And again, this is supposed to be environmentally friendly. Anyway, that's power. Just generically, power is how fast. Okay, so I'm a baseball player, say. I could swing a bat this fast, and it would take the same amount of energy as if I swing it really fast. But if I swing it really fast, I've got more power to put into the swing to make the baseball go farther.
So the first way the ball would just kind of fall to the ground. Max?
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think one of the fundamentally important things for people to understand here is that fossil fuels are literally made up of millions of years of sunlight, turned into along with carbon from the atmosphere, turned into the bodies of living creatures and compressed under massive geological pressure into one of the most energy dense substances known. It's millions of years of sunlight, right? And that's why that number that Lior mentioned earlier, 46 kilojoules of energy density compared to 1 in a lithium-ion battery, it's very, very challenging, if not impossible, to replace that energy source. And this is one reason why, people like James Hansen, the climate scientist who, was a hero to me a decade ago for standing up to the fossil fuel industry, now he's advocating for nuclear power, which I think is an atrocity. I mean, all you have to do is study what did happen and what almost happened at Chernobyl, what did happen, what almost happened at Fukushima, at 3 Mile Island, not to mention the mining, the locations where they mine uranium and the atrocities associated with that, the birth defects, the downwinders, the nuclear tests, the nuclear weapons associations between the nuclear energy industry and the nuclear weapons industry that are really practically inseparable. And then that's not even to talk about the problem of nuclear waste, right? Which is probably the single biggest issue when it comes to nuclear power. Is that, you create these massive amounts of waste, which is incredibly radioactive for billions of years in some cases. To me, it's literally insane. But from the perspective of an industrial civilization, an empire, a society that has a sort of insatiable appetite for energy, nuclear power makes sense from that perspective, because they don't really care about those side effects. They don't really care about those costs. They can be externalized. They can be made to be paid by the Navajo, by the salmon in the Columbia River, by the people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? Everyone thinks that it won't come back to them until eventually it does. And then, suddenly there's this big issue like what's happening now with Russia and Ukraine, and everyone's taking nuclear war seriously all of a sudden after ignoring it for the last, 30 years since the Cold War ended. So it's terrible to me that these people are promoting nuclear energy as a solution. But it's also, in some senses, it's a recognition that wind and solar energy are by nature intermittent and pretty unreliable. And in places like Germany, where a lot of wind and solar has been brought onto the grid, there have been technical reports from the engineers associations in the country saying basically we can't add any more wind and solar to the grid. We can't add any more. No more, because it's too variable. It puts too much stress on our system. We can't manage the technical problem of getting electricity where it's needed, when it's needed, with more wind and solar on the grid. And so this is sort of one of those situations, if you take a step back, this is one of those situations where our society is reaching a point where, with these converging crises of, growing population, growing energy demand and consumption, climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, declining resource availability, declining oil availability, increased fear about all these different issues, we're reaching a point where we can't engineer our way out of these problems anymore, right? It's not an engineering problem fundamentally, not in that sense, not in the technological sense.
Right.
And, that's the conclusion of our book, basically, is that we need to step away from these bright green lies that wind and solar can just be substituted for fossil fuels, that EVs can just replace gas cars and everything else will stay the same. It's not going to stay the same. It can't stay the same.
Right.
We need, and we're going to see fundamental change.
Why would anybody want it to stay the same? We're consuming the only planet we have. It's the only reason we need industrial levels of energy, is because we are living this industrial civilization lifestyle, which means we're consuming the planet. Like, the entire point of this was we were going to be the people who stopped that. And I don't know how we changed to become the people who just want to continue to power it. But a lot of the environmental people who have gone over to the side of nuclear, they face this. The problem is that they've still got the wrong values. They realize, especially the ones who have real science backgrounds, like, this is never going to fill the gap. They see all the problems that we have seen, but And so they've abandoned it. They've abandoned things like wind and solar because they get it. This is never going to scale up to solve the problem that they see. And the problem is, how do we continue to fuel it? So instead, they're solving for the wrong variable, because the variable should be the health of the planet. And instead, the variable is, well, how do we keep industrial civilization moving? And so you can see, in their heart of hearts, is there this essential biophilia? Do they actually care about this planet, or do they want to just keep taking Lewis Mumford's magnificent bribe? And mostly they've gone bribe. They haven't gone planet.
I'm sure.
And that's really heartbreaking.
It's devastating. Absolutely. It's interesting. I was literally about to ask you, the next question was going to be about nuclear energy, Max. But you, great minds, my friend. So that's really cool. Thanks for explaining that. Because there is, it's, if I had to wager, not, without any moral expectation, I would probably wager that nuclear power is the way that governments and societies are going to try to go. Because it is the most bang for your buck, with all the problems that you listed and a lot more. I think they're going to go through with it anyway, unless somebody stops them. I think that they're just convinced it's the best option. So that's and you're right. I mean, it's a nuclear waste is awful, and they can't shoot it into space in case something goes wrong with a rocket in the midair, then everybody's dead. Right. It's just it's just amazing, like just how. Okay, I don't want to go off on a magic. But,
and I'll just add real quick on that point. I live in Lane County, Oregon, and not far from here in Corvallis is this company NewScale, which is researching quote unquote next generation small modular reactors, which all these proponents of this technology have been saying for decades. The next one is going to be safe. It's going to be immune to accidents. It's going to prevent issues of nuclear proliferation, and we're going to solve the problems of nuclear waste. It's a complete lie. If you actually look at the data and the information, not but what's being put out by a paid PR person from one of these companies trying to get more investors, but actual scientific data, it's a total lie. And, of course, nuclear fusion has been 20 years away for the last, 60 years at this point. And it doesn't actually solve the problems that it purports to in the first place.
That's interesting, because I hear from physicists that it would, and I don't know a lot about fusion, but that it's perfectly safe. It doesn't do the same thing that fission does. If something goes wrong with the reactor, the entire process shuts down and no radiation is leaked. I don't know. I mean, this could be all nonsense. You're right. And I supposedly recently there's one lab somewhere that got equal amount of output as they did input in a fusion reactor, which is like a big, huge step forward, even though it's net zero energy. It's whatever. Derek, you look like you want to chime in here.
Well, a couple things. One of them is that let's pretend for a second that fusion, that industrial fusion, as opposed to fusion in the sun, that industrial fusion was happening right now. That would be the worst possible thing for the world. Does the world really need more electric snowmobiles? Doesn't need any electric snowmobiles. I mean, if blue whales and coho salmon and Pacific lampreys were given a voice in this discussion, would they be going, that sounds like a fabulous idea? And Max, will you do your thought experiment? This is great. We're doing the book together, and he sends me this section about whether the world would be better off with cars that got 1 mile per gallon or 100 miles per gallon. And when he sent me his draft of that, I answered exactly the way that most people would answer. It was like, of course, 100 miles per gallon would be way better than 1 mile per gallon. But he made such a compelling argument. Can you please replicate that, Max, and then apply it to fusion?
Sure. Yeah. Well,
and then when you're done with all that, I want to come back and talk about Mumfords Democratic versus authoritarian techniques as it has to do with fusion.
Okay.
Absolutely. Well, just the first thing I would throw in there is that the Union of Concerned Scientists, their most recent report on these next generation nuclear technologies from last summer, basically called all the propaganda wishful thinking. That was their direct quote. One example, these modular salt reactors. They produce massive amounts of radioactive waste, far more than the last generation of reactors do. And it's even more dangerous from a nuclear proliferation standpoint. And they're very difficult to clean up at the end of their relatively short lifespans. But, you know, the story Derek brought up, it's all about this rhetorical question, which is, if you could snap your fingers, every car in the world would get 1 mile per gallon, or you could snap your fingers and every car in the world would get 100 miles per gallon, which would be better for the planet, which would result in a better outcome. And what I argue in the book is that 1 mile per gallon would be far better for the planet, because if all the cars get really good gas mileage, if everything's very efficient, that incentivizes people to drive. It's very cheap to go places, right? And that has major social consequences. You're going to see budgets shift towards more parking lots, more suburban sprawl. You're going to see more energy and money go towards expanding freeways and widening highways around the country. You're going to see economies of scale where suddenly it's so cheap to own a car that everyone wants one. Right now, only about 20% of people in the world have a car. But if driving is incredibly cheap, all of a sudden it's going to be more attractive, and the factories are going to pump out more and more and more of them. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, if all the cars get 1 mile per gallon, it's really expensive to drive. And that's a big disincentive for driving. I mean, this is pretty simple stuff, right? Environmentalists have been saying for decades that we're not paying enough for gas, you know, that the true costs of gas are externalized onto the planet, onto poor people, onto poor communities, and that we don't, you know, the price that you pay at the pump doesn't actually account for the pollution, the global warming, the devastated ecosystems, the poisoned water, none of which the company cleans up, none of which they deal with, right? They just leave that for everyone else to deal with, and for our kids and grandkids to deal with. So that's the thought experiment. Derek, do you want to jump in with Mumford?
Well, I want to say one more thing about that, which is basically the day that, oh, yeah, you say that in a second. So the day that I got this from Max, I had driven 5 miles out of my way to get some delicious tacos at a local taco place. And I got home, and then I thought, okay, 5 miles each way, so it was 10 miles total. And, you know, I get what, 40 miles a gallon, so that's a quarter tank of gas, or quarter gallon of gas. So it cost me an extra, at the time, $2 for the tacos. No big deal. But if I was getting $1 a gallon, and let's say at the time gas was $3 a gallon, that's 10 gallons. That's an extra $30 for the tacos. No way am I driving up there. So it's just a tangible example of Max's thought experiment, and how that leads to, well, let's go to Jevons paradox.
Right. So Jevons was this guy who was studying, it was the time of coal expansion in England, and they were inventing all these machines to pump water out of mines to get more coal. So it was like coal making more coal. And he wanted to see, oh, what if we could make this all more efficient? What happens then? And what he realized pretty quickly was that the more efficient you made it, the more people used it. And this is the problem, that I feel like environmentalists should just know this instinctively, and yet somehow we seem as resistant as everybody else to this concept. When you make something cheaper, they use it more. And it really is that simple. And so Jevons paradox has been tested on 124 different substances, like everything from copper to silica, whatever. Every last one of them follows the pattern of Jevons paradox. The cheaper you make it, the more people use it. So all of this stuff where we're going to save energy by using these better light bulbs. Look, we will use less electricity. We've never used less electricity by making things more energy efficient. We just use up the rest of it then. It just makes us use more of it. And that's just, we need to come to grips with this, because it seems built in, like, oh, well, just, all these measures that, save electricity or save energy. They don't. It's never worked once.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that the same way, like how companies, like when the supply and demand thing, like if their resources, if they're what they need to make their product becomes difficult to get or costs more money, they slow down their production so that less people can use it, or they raise the prices. I'm sorry, they raise their prices to slow down production because less people buy it. That's the idea. So yeah, the cheaper it is, the more people are going to buy it. So it expands outwardly instead of like upward, if you will, on a graph. Yeah, sorry, Derek, go ahead.
So two things. One is, so if let's say that fusion made electricity incredibly cheap, what that would make, which of course we've heard that argument before, that back in the 50s they said that nuclear energy would make it so nobody would bother to put in meters because electricity would be so cheap. But let's say they did. Again, all that means, okay, a great example, and this Max is the one who found this, is that houses have become about, I believe, 25% more energy efficient between the 70s and now in the United States. So does that mean they use less energy? No. What they do is they've gotten 25% bigger.
Right.
And the other part I want to bring, so if there was tremendously cheap, I mean, if it was free to drive a car, I mean, I would go those extra 5 miles. I'd go 50 miles to get the tacos, you know? It's
by the time, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so the other thing that's really important about fusion is Lewis Mumford talked about how he talked about something called a technic, which is a combination of a social system and a technology. Technologies don't emerge from a vacuum. They emerge from a certain social system, and they give rise to certain social systems. And there are democratic and authoritarian techniques. The technic is the combo of the social system and the technology. And there are democratic and authoritarian ones. And the point is, like, mining requires an authoritarian system because you have to take the land from somebody, then you have to force people into the mines, and then you have to once you get the ore, you have to protect it so nobody's going to steal it. And so you require a military and a slave force and a police force at every step for mines. And the point here having to do with fusion is that you can't make it in your backyard. It's not like an apple tree that can grow and then you can have your own apples. It's not like
passive solar house.
A passive solar house where your house is designed a certain way and then nobody can control it. It's the difference between, what was the one that you just told me the other day about they ran out of bullets?
Oh yeah.
Bullets?
So basically it was
it was a historical thing I was reading, and it was woodland tribes in the northeast of the United States, and it was like year 1700 or so, and there was just this throwaway line about how there was a letter that was written to one of the colonial governments saying that the indigenous people were starving. I don't remember which tribe it was, but they were starving, and the reason was because they'd run out of shot and they'd run out of gunpowder. And I thought, God, this is the year 1700. It wouldn't have been 100 years before that everyone would have known how to make a bow and arrow and a spear. They would have known how to hunt without,
or a net to go fishing or something. Yeah, I mean,
something like everybody on the planet knew how to get food once upon a time. They would have known when they were 5 years old how to make flint tools or do the technology that was useful to them. And it just broke my heart that it took that few generations. This has happened everywhere to everyone, right?
To wipe out that knowledge.
Just to take away this like really basic ancestral knowledge about what is food, how do you get it, and to train everybody how to do it. And it's like, and now they're all starving because it's all been taken from them, and the technology. Go ahead.
And because now they're reliant upon distant authorities.
They can't do it themselves anymore.
I just read the exact same thing about Indians in the upper Mississippi drainage, that it only took, 40, 50 years after the introduction of tin or metal cookware for their long tradition of pottery to be pretty much lost. That they no longer. So the point here having to do with this is that Mumford would call those authoritarian techniques because someone can control you from a distance, and nobody can control your ability to weave baskets. Nobody can control your ability to make a bow and arrow. Nobody can control your ability to make pottery. So what I'm getting at is, let's pretend that fusion works, and let's pretend that it's this miracle, and let's pretend that there are no problems with it, and let's ignore all my stuff about how that would make more abundant energy to destroy the planet. Let's ignore all those. What happens if we make ourselves reliant upon it, and then we find out 20 years down the road that there are terrible, terrible problems with it? My point is that we have made ourselves reliant upon it. This is one of the problems I had with nuclear energy back when I was 20 years old. And I remember reading about David Ehrenfeld wrote about this in The Arrogance of Humanism, that do you want to commit yourself to a way of life that requires this authoritarian system for how many billion years was it, Max, for the nuclear waste? I mean, you're committing yourself. This is, you know, this is going into the thicket, but you know, I essentially was an environmentalist from when I was very young because of a fundamental conservatism, by which I don't mean politically conservative. I just mean, I think it's an absolutely terrible idea to kill the salmon in a river that you might require to eat tomorrow. I just think that's a bad idea.
It's a pretty stupid idea.
I'm sorry, what?
It's a very bad idea. Yes.
And it's the same with the nuclear stuff. It's a really bad idea. So mines, you know, hard rock mining destroys rivers. And I think it's a really bad idea to make yourself reliant upon a way of life that is polluting rivers and making it so they're still dead from the time of the Romans. And it's the same with all this stuff that I just think. And so fusion will further commit us to this way. I mean, Daniel Quinn said this, and he said it much more eloquently than this, but basically he said, part of our problem is that we are reliant for our lives upon a system that is functionally killing the planet. And we have committed ourselves to that path. And really, you know, now I'm jumping a different direction, that if I were to sum up all of Bright Green Lies, and if I were to sum up all of my work for 25 books into one or two sentences, it would be, this way of life won't last forever. And when it's done, I would prefer that there's more of the world left rather than less. Yeah. And fusion leans more into the wrong direction.
Yes.
Well, Gary Mander said something very similar in the his wonderful book, In the Absence of the Sacred, which has got to be 30 years old now. But he talks about this nuclear priesthood, that this is what we've committed ourselves to. There's going to have to be somebody who knows how to handle this stuff for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And it's like the pharaohs of ancient Egypt and their dynasties could not have imagined anything that long. And this is what we're going to need, because you're always going to need somebody who understands what this stuff is, how to deal with it, because it's toxic for that long. And so this is what's been set up. And so these are our priests. And, you know, it's basically a hereditary position, and we are always going to need them. We are always going to be, you know, paying sacrifice to them so that we can have them. And I just can't see that this is a future. It's like, it's profoundly authoritarian. I mean, there's just very few number of them who are going to have this power and this knowledge. And the rest of us are just like, please don't set the world on fire.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, it's pretty scary stuff for sure. We only have like 7 or 8 minutes left. I want this just flew by. We're just gonna have to have you on again and again, because I have 8,000 more questions. However, I wanted to get to, what do you think the solution is? Because you start off by saying that you know, it's really, as soon as humankind learned how to plant food is when things started to go awry. Because like what you were saying about the ores, the mines, Derek, you know, once you have this stabilized area, you need somebody to protect it, and you need, you know, and with, you know, invading villages and that kind of thing. So there's war, there's politics, there's your little economy, authoritarian economy, because you got to dupe these people into, you know, going and killing and dying for, you know, a tomato plant, you know, and there's all sorts of bad things happening from there. So, but we're so far past that and so ingrained in technology, and petroleum being in everything. What's the solution? What do you think? You said you had hope, Derek. Well, I would love to hear it.
Lay it out there.
I said I had hope
last time. Maybe you were just trying to appease me, because I was getting very upset.
Well, the fact that I said I had hope makes me think of the book that I have that just got released yesterday called Marijuana: A Love Story, because I don't know what I was smoking to say that. Yeah.
As soon as we're done.
So hope I find interesting, and I wrote an essay called Beyond Hope many years ago, that hope really is a longing for a future condition over which we have no agency. And that's how we use it. That's how we use it every day.
Mhm.
If you get on an airplane, you say, I hope it doesn't crash, because once you're in the air, you've got no agency. On the other hand,
It's a wish.
if you're a little kid and your mother says to you, go clean your room, and you say, well, I hope it gets clean, your mother will say, yeah, you better hope it gets clean.
Your hope is to avoid a whooping.
Because I'm not going to say to you, I hope that I eat something, because when we get off, I'm actually going to eat something.
Right.
And I have control over that. If
Right.
I were in a place with no food, I could say, I hope I eat something. So when people say, I hope that salmon survive, what they're really saying is, I'm not going to do anything. You can. What they really mean when they say, I hope salmon survive, is I hope salmon survive as long as we don't have to take out dams, stop industrial logging, stop industrial fishing, stop the murder of the ocean, stop global warming, and stop industrial agriculture. Which there is a role for hope once you do what you need to do. You can, if you take out the dams, stop industrial agriculture, stop industrial logging, stop industrial fishing, stop the murder of the ocean, stop global warming, then it's up to the salmon in the river to accept your offering, and then it's up to them. But people say, I hope that something good happens. Well, that does nothing unless you're actually doing what's necessary. So I'm really interested in what it takes. And this culture, I mean, the planet cannot survive industrial civilization. And I do have some hope from places like Chernobyl. I recognize there's problems, but when they stopped industrial agriculture, the wolves came back. And there are 200 and some dead zones in the oceans, and there is one that has recovered, and that is in the Black Sea. And the reason it recovered is because the Soviet Union collapsed, and it was no longer economically feasible to do industrial agriculture along the shores. And so there was no longer fertilizer running into the ocean, and it recovered enough that they put in a fishery there. And they're catching fish commercially, which I'm not too keen on. But I also don't want to say, I'm not one of those people who says, oh, everything's going to be okay. You know, don't worry about the planet at all. Everything will be fine. I don't believe that at all. But what I do believe is that, look, I don't know if you can, well, you got to put it in front of the camera.
I don't see it.
Well, somewhere over here, there's a scar. And the point is that our body has a tremendous capacity to heal.
Yes.
But you can't push it too far.
That's right.
If you push it too far, you're going to lose your hand, or you're going to lose your life. And there is tremendous resilience in nature as long as it's not pushed too far. And I honestly think that if civilization disappeared tomorrow, I think salmon would be fine. I think that salmon are resilient enough. They survived all the Missoula floods. They've survived lots of problems. If civilization disappeared tomorrow, salmon would be okay. I think in another 10 years, we won't be able to say that. And maybe 5 years.
True.
And I think that prairie dogs are so forgiving. I mean, they live in medians of highways, and they're still down to 1% of their population and range. And if civilization disappeared tomorrow, I think prairie dogs can come back, but the passenger pigeons won't. And chestnuts, maybe not. So what hope I have is in resilience of the planet. But here's the thing. One of the images I keep thinking about is you have some body is brought into the emergency room, and you have all the nurses and doctors are putting bandages on, they're doing everything they can to keep the body alive. And those are the environmentalists. And meanwhile, they're doing everything except the most important thing of all, which is you have somebody standing there still stabbing the body over and over and over.
Oh.
And that's environmentalists. We're doing everything we can to put bandages here and there, but not stopping the primary harm.
Right.
And I was going to pass it over to Lear, but she ran away. And so I'm going to pass it to Max, and then Lear can come back.
Okay. Max?
She'll be a great end. Yeah, I mean, I would just say Derek said that very well and very eloquently, and I would just say to help people make it concrete, to reiterate, he was saying we need to stop the destruction of the planet. So we need to stop these major activities that are destroying the planet, and that's industrial agriculture, fossil fuels, mining, global trade networks, industrial logging, industrial fishing, and a lot more small industries as well. And of course, that also means we need to address things like overpopulation and overshoot and overconsumption, because, there are almost 8 billion people on the planet, and the only way those people are alive is because of an industrial food system, right? So we're dependent on a system that's killing the planet right now, and that can't continue. It's going to give in some way. Even the guy who basically was the founding father of the Green Revolution and came up with these plant breeding techniques to hugely increase food yields, even he said this is basically a temporary emergency measure that's going to give us 20 more years to try and solve this massive population issue that we have, right? And he devoted the rest of his life to working for family planning and humane ways to address human population issues. And, unfortunately, that's gotten wrapped up by some very unsavory characters into issues of racism and eugenics and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But that's the exception. That's very much the exception. If you look at the work that's being done around the world right now and in the past on overpopulation, almost all of it is firmly rooted in human rights, in respect for people, and respect for especially the rights of women and girls. And, that's really important that we do that. And I think it's important that we recognize throughout all of this, stopping the destruction, addressing overpopulation, overconsumption, all these different issues, that a lot of that isn't going to happen without a fight. This isn't going to be like a walk in the park. I mean, this is going to be generational struggles of people pouring their lives into these issues and working as hard as they goddamn can. And even then, maybe if we're lucky, we'll get through this. But it's in a pretty dire situation. So
I think, yeah. I mean, I'm guessing that with agricultural problems happening in the near, that our first deadline is less than 8 years away for like reducing 45% emissions globally, which means it's probably not going to happen. And the second deadline of 2050, if 2030 doesn't happen, the second one doesn't matter. When you start interrupting people's food and drink and stuff like that, these super fundamental resources, I think people are going to get violent, and it's going to just turn into a big ball of chaos. Personally, my hope is I have a spirituality, sort of a pagan leaning spirituality, and I'm just hoping the gods and goddesses come back and just start whipping butt. Anyway, Leah, why don't you go ahead and take us home?
So the number one thing that you can do, this has been studied backwards, forwards, inside out. The number one thing you can do to drop the birth rate around the globe is really simple, and it's teach a girl to read. Which is to say that when women and girls have even that much more power over their lives, they can choose to have fewer children. Right now, half the children that are born every single year are either unplanned or unwanted. So all we have to do is give women full reproductive sovereignty, and the problem cures itself. This was never people versus planet. It was always people plus planet. But the people that have to count are women and girls. So until women and girls are fully human, we're never going to solve this, and we will drive this planet to extinction. So we're all going to have to be feminists. Gosh, what a shame. Here I'm wearing my woman shirt.
What are you wearing?
Yeah, woman. Wait,
oh, okay, right on.
Woman, adult human, female.
Adult human, female. Nice.
Yeah, so that's what we have to do. Once women have that kind of sovereignty and even just a little bit more power, we could just every single year, just keep dropping the birth rate until it's something sustainable. As it turns out, when everybody has what they need, which is like basic food and basic medical care, a little bit of education, the average couple actually chooses to have 2 children, which is replacement levels.
Right.
Which is interesting that that's actually what people want when all things are equal and everybody has what they need. That's what they choose. So all we have to do is give people what they need. And, you know, people are poor because the rich are stealing from them, and women don't have rights because men take them. So
100%.
we just got to fix that. You know, I mean, it's actually quite simple. I'm not saying it's easy, but it is simple.
Right.
And then for the planetary part, yeah, I mean, even still, it's not too late to sequester that carbon. We're just not doing it. You know, the real problem, of course, is we've touched on here is agriculture, and that is where global warming began, especially rice agriculture, but all of it. And what happened is when you do agriculture, you destroy the soil. And when those bonds are broken, it just releases all that carbon into the air. So we don't have topsoil anymore because it was all turned into carbon in the atmosphere. So that's where it is. We need to get it back down into the soil. And the way to do that is, of course, to repair those regions that have been taken. And I mean taken as in a war, because agriculture is a war against the living world. We need to give that land back to the planet. We need to give it back to the bison and the prairies, because that cohort of ruminants and grasses they're the people who can do this. They build soil at an extraordinary rate, and the basic building block is carbon. So they're the ones. They've got to get it back out. And that means we have to stop doing agriculture, put down those weapons, the longest war in history, and simply let the grasses come home. If we were to do that over about 80% of the world's trashed out grasslands, it would take about 10 years, maybe 12 years. We could sequester all of the carbon that's been released since the beginning of the industrial age, all of it. It is not too late. The planet knows how to do this. We simply have to stop destroying. It's not a difficult concept. It's emotionally difficult. It's not like theoretically hard. It's not cognitively challenging.
Right.
We're in our own way because we're so attached to this way of life. But really only 3 generations of people were ever going to get to experience this. It's going to be a myth in 100 years. We've just got to face that, people. We've taken it all. There's nothing left. And if we want there to be oxygen in 100 years, we've just got to take it seriously.
Absolutely. Well said. Okay, real quick. Jenny Lester asked, is this written in the book about Teach a Girl to Read?
Yes, in pretty much all my books, we mentioned this. But in Bright Green Lies, yeah, in our chapter about solutions, we've got all that in there. So we encourage you to read our book.
Very cool. Yeah. No, I know. Everybody, please read this book. This is an amazing book. I'm so glad. I don't remember how I came upon it. I think I saw you guys in an interview or something. Did I say that last time? I think I saw Max and Derek in an interview somewhere, and I don't even remember where. And I was like, "Oh, this is really interesting." And I got the book and I read it. I was like, "Holy cow!" I'm like, "This is amazingly disturbing."
Well, the solutions that we push for everywhere are pretty much the same, which is grasslands know how to sequester carbon, forests know how to sequester carbon. Peat bogs know how to sequester carbon. Kelp forests, salt marshes, mangrove swamps, they all know how to sequester carbon. Oh, and Max, I know we have to go, but give us the extreme detail on everything, the complicated process of repairing a peat bog. I believe it's 2 steps.
Yeah, basically these peat bogs throughout Scandinavia and other Arctic portions of the world, subarctic portions of the world, have been destroyed by draining them. So people just dug drainage ditches and routed the water away from them to dry them out. And now the peat's dug up and it's sent into, it's used in flower pots all around the world, and it's used in power plants. They burn it and it's worse than coal. And the way you restore it, you take a shovel and you put that dirt back in the ditch, and then you walk away.
Tough stuff.
One of the best carbon sequestering ecosystems on the planet.
Yeah, peat bogs are very, very important for sure. Wetlands, bogs. I know that there's a controversy over being a gardener myself professionally. Peat moss is an extremely valuable amendment for soil. It works very, very well, but for every square inch that you use, it took decades to grow.
Yeah.
It's such an inefficient and ridiculous method but there's other ways to go about amending your soil, folks. I mean, peat moss is great, okay, but it's not the only thing in town, okay? You can do other things that is not environmentally harmful. I mean, when it takes decades to grow something and you use the first season, that's not okay. There needs to be some sort of proportion between resources, length of resource development and use. There has to be. Otherwise, that's what efficiency is. Jenny, real quick, yes, I will list the titles on Basecamp. And yeah, we went a little over, but that's okay because I mean I could go on forever and ever here, but I think StreamYard's about to kick us off because I only set it up till 8 o'clock. So Leah, thank you so much for joining us. That was fabulous. Great to meet you. Derek, Max, thank you so much. I really, seriously, thank you so much for what you do and what you did and what you're going to continue to do. Leah's trying to get her. It's such an important book, and I proselytize people to read it all the time. And a few of my friends have at least started reading it and have, had some definite concerns, whilst reading it. Hi, Dougie. And very, very, as well as they should. I don't know. I don't know what the solution. I mean, I do know what the solutions are because I have certifications and all sorts of things that tell me what the solutions are. It's just a matter of getting people to do it. That's really it. And like I said, we're so far entrenched into the industrial era, and with the new technology like computers and stuff like that. I mean, I don't know, man. The whole world is now interrelated through technology. You shut it down, you shut down the world, and I don't think people want to do that. It
doesn't matter what people want.
I agree. No, I absolutely.
I know. I mean, I'm just repeating this. It does not matter what we want. What matters is what the planet can sustain. The
100%.
planet cannot endure this. People have got to face it. It doesn't matter how much we want it. We are not spoiled toddlers. We are grown-up adults. We need to face reality. Oh, we've got a great quote. James Howard Kunstler, it's, cranky extraordinaire, but he has this great line about what we need to be reality-based adults. Like, give up these ridiculous dreams. It's like that's it. Our planet needs us to be reality-based adults.
I like that, reality-based. I'm gonna make a bummer. Who said that?
James Howard Kunstler, who wrote the Geography of Nowhere, and he wrote Too Much Magic, and he's End of Suburbia. He's written a lot of books about peak oil. Did he write The Long Descent? That was somebody else. Yeah. Anyway, a bunch of books about peak oil and about. He originally started talking about how the built environment of suburbia was completely insane, essentially, and that it made people insane. And then he went on to talk about peak oil stuff, and we are in this energy descent whether we like it or not, and what comes next. But he's made it tough stuff, so he'll say stuff like that to people.
Okay, right on. Very cool. Why don't you give some contact info as far as where people, not necessarily contact, but where people can find your site links. That's what they're called, links where people can go find your stuff.
All three of us have our own websites, so you can go there. So it's just our names.com, except Derek is .org, right? Yeah, Max, are you a .com? You're okay. I'm a .com. They're .orgs.
What's going on there?
That's pretty easy. I don't know how I got .com and they're with .org. But
okay, and you've all obviously you've written together this book. Derek, you mentioned some other books you've written, and Leah, you said you've written books. Max, do you have other books out there?
I've got an essay collection that I wrote years ago, but to tell the truth, I'm kind of embarrassed about some of the essays in it now that I'm older. So
that's okay. I'm a guitar player, and if I played you some of the songs I wrote 30 years ago, well, I won't. It's not happening because they're ridiculous. Anyway, so I get it.
You can wander on over to our websites and find all our other lovely missives we have put out into the world.
So you'll find out the stuff
models that we have launched into the river, and also where we're appearing and other things we've interviewed and all that. You'll find everything that you really could to know about us.
Yeah.
Can you sum up in 30 seconds how the book is being received?
Well, we've had mostly good reviews, but we've had very few because most of the mainstream kind of outlets that we were, of course, always hoping to, they don't want to touch it. It's terrifying to them and they think we're crazy. So it's mostly word of mouth. That's just the way it is. We are Cassandras out here in the wilderness screaming the truth. I don't know if you saw that movie, Don't Look Up, but
yes,
Jennifer Lawrence, you're all gonna die. I feel like she's my spirit animal because here we are, and nobody wants to hear. We're thrown from the movement, out into the hinterlands, and that's just what it's going to be like because we're going to keep telling the truth. Our planet is dying. We are doing it. We need to stop it.
Yeah, no, a lot of people are saying it's more of a documentary than an actual fictional film. Derek, sorry, go.
I think the response to this book has been pretty similar for me to the response to most of my books, which is a lot of ignoring by the mainstream, but a lot of gratitude by frontline activists and appreciation by frontline activists. And another thing I want to mention specifically having to do with this book is we have gotten a fair number of notes from engineers who love the book, because it's like, I have been waiting for someone to take an engineering approach and a full cost accounting approach to a lot of the bright green stuff. And it's like, this is what I've been writing on the backs of envelopes. They've said, you know, I've been writing this on the back of the envelopes for the last 30 years, that this stuff, it doesn't, as they say, pencil in.
Yeah.
It's actually been pretty good.
Good. Well, very cool. Okay, so we're like way over. So which is okay.
Well, we'll just do it again sometime.
Oh no, we absolutely will. In fact, if you would hang on after I end the show, we can chat about maybe another day. Yeah, because I replay this on Thursdays at the radio station, 98.3 FM WRLR. So, and I only have an hour to do that. That's usually why I time it about 55 minutes and then cut it off. But anyway, again, thank you so much, Max. You seem to be just a cursor in the middle of the screen right now. I apologize.
He'll pop back up.
They'll pop back up, of course. Thank you again so much for joining us, everybody. This is just extremely important stuff, and again, I appreciate all that you do. Keep going, and again, hang on till for after the show. Thanks for tuning into the Green Party. I'm your host, David Rich. Till next time, be good, be green.